It's going.
Hey, YouTube.
It's passing through all of the cables underneath the Atlantic Ocean right now as we speak.
Sure.
All right. We are now live. We are live now on YouTube. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out to this most recent episode of the Other Life podcast. The podcast where I talk with all kinds of interesting, sometimes random, sometimes not random, internet people and representatives of all the little subcultures that I'm interested in and the vague micro ideologies that I'm interested in, different occupational strata, and all different types of, subsectors of society we explore on this podcast. Today, we are joined by Nicole Williams, who
Hello.
is primarily, in my mind, you are primarily a Twitter personality. I forget how I know you. I think we first got hooked up to do this podcast because you literally tweeted, I want to do a podcast. And then someone, I think, retweeted you and mentioned me. And I was like, yeah, sure. Let's do a podcast.
Amazing. The best way to start out.
You don't remember who that was, do you?
I think it was Default Friend.
Oh, yeah. I think she deact.
Yes. Yeah, indeed. Her activation is always chaotic.
So I don't want to start things off in a super inside baseball way, but I'm kind of curious. How do you know Default Friend, aka Katya?
That is a great question. I honestly have no clue how we originally crossed paths.
Cool. No worries.
Tell you.
No worries. I don't remember how I met you. I don't know that much about you, but that's the fun of this podcast. I regularly talk with people that I really only know them as a vague Twitter persona or some kind of internet persona. And then the fun of this is to try to get to the bottom of who you are and what you're all about. And learn a thing or two from you. So first of all, thank you for coming out, Nicole.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you are in the VC world, roughly. Is that right? I believe you are actually right now acting as an investor, or you're on an investment team. How would you describe it? Doing seed stage startup research. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm an investor at Compound. So I invest in, seed and pre-seed frontier tech companies, which is like anybody who has like super technical, whether it's a co-founder, whatever, robotics, AI, ML, avatar-based social media, all sorts of cool stuff.
Right on. And how long have you been doing this game?
Exactly 2 months.
2 months. Okay, so brand new. So what were you doing before that?
Oh man. Before that I was at Lambda School actually. I don't know if you've
Oh yeah, sure. Right on.
Yeah.
Cool.
I have a lot of thoughts on that, but that was an interesting experience.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Let's talk about that. So for people who don't know about Lambda School, it's one of these very interesting startups that is basically trying to disrupt education. And what Lambda School does, I mean, Nicole can tell you much more about it, but what Lambda School does is basically they will give you a education in fields such as software engineering. And I think they do a few other fields also. And basically, if you get a good job, they take a cut of it. And that's their business model. Their business model is getting you a good job. And that's how they get paid. So the incentives are arguably very well aligned, much more so than traditional education. And they're very well known at the moment for being a very kind of impressive, interesting, and disruptive startup that took off very quickly with a relatively low resource, I think rather bootstrapped system where they were just basically using Slack and Zoom, and they just kind of glued some things together to launch, and they got off the ground very quickly. And I've heard very good things. I think there are some critiques, so we could have an interesting conversation about this. So let's start there. How was Lambda School for you?
Yeah, sure. So I guess for context, like my educational path has been all over the place. I went to hyper-conservative Liberty University, which is like the largest evangelical university, I think, in the world. I'm a Christian, but Liberty did not work out for me for a variety of reasons. And so I left there and have been like to all sorts of like online universities and Coursera and whatever, interested in boot camps for a while. And Lambda School stuck out to me because their curriculum is actually pretty solid. Sent it to a lot of friends doing data science, applied mathematics, whatever.
What track did you do?
Data science.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right on.
So for a while, I had been pretty interested in machine learning. I went through an incubator at a medical, or an accelerator at a medical Innova hospitals like on the East Coast, like researching some technology I thought was interesting. And for a long time, I tried to put together my own syllabi for college because basically I couldn't pay for college myself. I like separated from my family, was like living on my own, trying to get an education. Like I had friends going to really good schools. And so I would take their syllabi, put together my own syllabi, put together readings, like ask people sort of like guerrilla style what they thought I should learn. That took a lot of time, it turned out. So Lambda School curriculum, that was great. That was ideal for me. However, it's kind of a shit show internally, for sure. And up until recently, I would say if you are very motivated to learn, you need accountability and you need the structure, go for it. But I found out, so the structure about their ISA is that technically you don't pay for it. You don't pay for it until you get a job over a certain salary. And you're also not supposed to pay for it unless you get a job in the field you studied. And obviously that's a little bit hard to enforce and or like make sure people are being truthful about, but obviously got a job as an investor. My day-to-day is not doing data science at all. And so went through the appropriate guidance that is dictated on their site, didn't hear anything back, naively assumed everything was great, got a text a week ago that they're about to charge my bank for my ISA. Nobody will answer any questions about this. And it turns out there's been a long historical precedent for this happening. So there's like a lot of sketchiness around operational stuff.
So how do you feel about it? Because I mean, I could understand one argument, which is that even if you get a job in a different field, presumably they did give some value to building up your career and your image, and probably some network value also in landing that job, perhaps. So do you feel conflicted about it? Do you partially feel like it's fair enough, but also a little sketchy, or what's your take on it?
Honestly, I think I totally understand the argument that if they provided me some network value, right? Like that's the main value of colleges as they stand. That's fine. If they came to me and said, hey, actually, you're not doing data science. We think we provided you some value. Give us money. I would feel more compelled to give them my money, but just not responding and not dealing with it. Like I know Lambda employees check Twitter all the time. And I've also tweeted about this on Twitter a lot. And so I know people have seen it. Like there's somebody who could hypothetically help me resolve this situation. And that's not happening, has been the case for many other people. And so I think that general attitude towards their students, which again, I like was in a group chat of students having legal issues for a while. And there's like all sorts of stuff that falls under this guise, is just not great. They're just very publicly faced, you know, they're tweeting, like the CEO has been tweeting about like, we're giving out like free digital healthcare consultations, and there are people who will randomly get moved back in their course for a month, and they're like, I'm not losing a month of salary that I saved up for, rather than like 4 online mental health courses. Like
interesting. Well, I'm gonna wager that they're not responding for legal reasons, probably, right? It must be a really touchy legal point, and their attorneys probably say, just don't touch this.
Yeah, but I don't know. I'm about to dig into like what the responsibilities are in terms of answering people about the ISAs soon, obviously, but I just think.
Okay. And how was your experience in the school? Did you enjoy that? Did you find that, did they add a lot of value, or what do you think?
I think the primary value they add is the middle chunk is like a project-based cross-functional. So there are other courses like UX and like web development or whatever, and you build a project with another team. Nobody there are very few. There are a lot of teachers who have good intentions. There are few people who are genuinely good at teaching, and even fewer people who know how to make digital curriculum that's effective. I think that's like the issue of a lot of digital education things, is like the platform is one venture. Khan Academy like maybe gets a good portion of that, right? The curriculum is like a whole nother thing, and the teaching of that is like a whole nother thing. And so Lambda School is just going at all of these verticals all at once. A lot of the curriculum is okay in practice, but the assessments change week to week. The primary people you're talking to are students who they basically, if you fail or you don't assess accurately or like highly enough on a test, they push you back a month. And that's super arbitrary. They're changing those tests like every few weeks or so, and the people who do that then are out of a month's salary. They only tell you to save up for 9 months of not having a job while you're going through Lambda School, because that's how long the program is. And then they often say to these people who are suddenly out a month of salary, look, you can be a team lead. they pay, I think, like $15 an hour to team leads, and you can do that when you only have 4 weeks of data science experience under your belt. So there's a lot of people then who your primary point of contact is of like, this string of Python doesn't work, and they're like, I don't know what that is. I can tell you what to do to make it better, but like I can't even give you any overarching principles for like what we're learning, because they're brand new to data science as well.
Right.
So I think that is the biggest current flaw. I would say there's a lot of organizational chaos in general. Like they're clearly trying to scale up way too fast. The value is their focus is not on the students. Their focus is very much on external appearances. And it seems like they're just falling to a lot of the same stuff that like traditional universities is, which is like administrative chaos. You can't get through to any of the important people you need to talk to. Nobody's answering for their mistakes.
Interesting inside look at Lambda School. Cause yeah, it does seem very cool from the outside. And it seems like this really lean operation that is doing impressive numbers with an impressive mission. And, you know, they're moving fast and really disrupting something that a lot of people want to see disrupted, which is education. So it's really interesting to kind of hear an inside story on what it's actually like. I mean, my heart kind of goes out to them though, frankly, because I could not imagine scaling up something like that as rapidly as they are. It must be so hard to manage that and to actually give all students an ideal kind of experience. I can't imagine the difficulty of it.
There's a whole nother track, the UX track, that they actually basically actively canceled in the middle of it and told students that they like needed to pay for the half that they had already experienced, even though they weren't finishing the program, because people were complaining so actively that it was just atrocious. Like teachers would come in not knowing what they're supposed to be teaching and all that type of stuff. So
yeah. I mean, it sounds like an operational nightmare. I mean, it sounds so hard to do that with so many people so quickly. But interesting, very interesting. So, okay. So you're a Christian yourself and you go to Liberty University and you're like, fuck this, I'm out of here. I can't do this. Is it because it was too conservative or what?
No, I mean, so for even more context, I went to a Christian K through 12 school. Like I'm used to rules, I'm used to dress codes. Like I understand the value of that to an extent. But craziness, like Jerry Falwell Jr., who you may have read about this man. Lots of Politico articles about his activities in like Miami and all that type of stuff. He's like pretty tight with Donald Trump. And yeah, the school is just, I have a lot of issues with academia, but I think Liberty was in many ways one of the like worst versions of this, which is just that my experience with like Christians and academias and intellectuals before was that the school I went to is so thoughtful. We had to write a senior thesis defending our like theological beliefs, argue that in front of a panel of people who were very thoughtful as well. We're sort of given the space to argue really anything we wanted as long as we defended it thoughtfully. And Liberty University was just about the opposite of that. You couldn't argue with professors. If you did, everybody in your class was like, what are you doing? You're arguing.
So it was all like Christian dogma, no questioning.
Yeah, it just was, everything they were teaching is fairly outdated. There's not a lot of encouragement for discussions or debate, which I found very jarring.
So you drop out of there and then you're looking for resources. You're trying to put together your own thing, looking at Lambda School, decide to go with Lambda School. And it sounds like it was a mixed bag, but you did ultimately end up with the job. And so now you're doing early seed stage research for a venture capital fund.
And so in between that, there's a few things that went down. So Lambda School, Liberty was in 2016 and Lambda School was a few months ago. But in between that, I worked at a tech research company for a while, an internship that sort of turned into a job. And then I found later 2 random people who were running this startup that was about basically running experimental educational initiatives for like quote unquote cutting edge STEM and entrepreneurship areas. So like computational neuroscience, various areas of aerospace, additive manufacturing, whatever. And so that was where I worked for a long time in the middle. That was a lot of fun. They basically taught me everything I know about machine learning there. I mean, I learned a lot of it on my own, but they assisted with that. So
right on. Yeah. Okay, interesting. And how long have you been on Twitter? Given that that's the main way I know you.
Just about since I was in Liberty University, coincidentally. I think right before that, but when I was like going crazy because suddenly I didn't have anybody to discuss whatever was on my mind with, Twitter and sort of like, I guess like post-rationalist adjacent people became a community that I got exposed to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you seem fairly well networked on Twitter. Is that fair to say? Are you friends with some pretty influential people? That's the vibe I get.
I guess, sure. Like, I mean, it depends how you,
Yeah,
people
no,
with
it's
followers follow me and
right. No, it's no big
occasionally
deal.
reach out.
I'm just kind of doing a little vibe check there. I get the sense
Mm,
that you're pretty well networked, and if you, I guess you haven't been on Twitter that long, so I'm kind of
yeah.
curious when you first got on Twitter, how did you kind of build your Twitter niche? How did you build your Twitter persona?
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. I mean, I have a bunch of alts, like a
Do
bunch
you?
of alt accounts. Yeah. I think currently I have 6.
How do you how
Um,
do you how do you write content for 6 accounts?
I mean, so the point is that basically, like, there is a bunch of bubbles on Twitter, right? And like, I'm sure you know that. And those groups, like, there's all really interesting ways. Like, I think design is so interesting in general. There's a lot of interesting ways to signal who you are. There's like the weird sons, right? Like, I'm sure you've seen them. And it's like just sort of like admiring and studying their in-group behavior is so interesting. So you can like make an account and like get in with them and sort of like practice talking like them and like understanding their ideas. Like it's like learning a foreign language, right? Like you immerse yourself in each of these little bubbles with a separate account.
Right, but
And
that's hard. That's hard work. It's time consuming. So how do you do that for 6 accounts?
I mean, I don't do it super actively. It's like I have like an urge to like learn, like I'll find something that's interesting, or I feel like if I find a community that is interesting and I think the people in it are too specific in a way that like I couldn't infiltrate them with my main account, then I'll be like, okay, either pivot an old alt account that I'm not using that much, or create a new one and see how I can sort of like slide into that and figure out what's going on in there. So
Wow.
it's not like it's not super active. I don't like think it's my job. It's just like as I
Right.
feel compelled.
And how much of this is just for fun and exploration? And how much of this is a kind of like Machiavellian power drive to build your network in a maximum
Oh,
way?
that's a great question. I mean, I don't think it's about building my network because I mean, it's about like exploring people and like why they're motivated to do things. Very rarely am I like, let me infiltrate like the smartest people in tech or like the
No, but
smartest
no, but I'm
people in
sure like
SaaS
sometimes
software.
do you ever have like a really good tweet on your main and you really want to get the word out there, so you go to all of your other accounts and retweet that tweet?
No, no, because that is like the easiest way to expose yourself. Like I figure out who's people like mutual friends who have alts. I will figure out who who their main account is because when you do that, it is the easiest way to like trace back
Yeah, but do you
what's
think people
up.
are really doing that tracing? I don't think so. I mean, I have two bot accounts that are
Really
that are sinister, pretending to be human bots. Uh,
interesting.
yeah, and if anyone ever found them and looked through the TL, you would know for sure it's Justin's sinister bot because it just retweets my shit.
Well, yeah, I guess it depends what your goal is, but like my goal is to see how seamlessly I can sort of like I don't know, just sort of camouflage myself. And
That's
if I
cool.
retweet my main account, that is like antithetical to that purpose.
Yeah, my two bot accounts, they what they do is they churn out tweets on via a Markov chain algorithm based on it that was trained on my own writings.
Mhm.
So every hour or something like that, it'll tweet out an auto generated tweet that's trained on a corpus of my writings. And then when I want
Amazing.
to like really signal boost one of my things, I'll go and manually have them all retweet it.
I like it. I mean,
Is that
hey, like I've talked to people who have scripts to like retweet their stuff. I had a friend like do that for me. Retweet from my main content, but like in a timely sense, you know what I mean? Like
right?
I understand that like urge as well. But yeah, it's less about like figuring out the mechanism is less interesting for me. But
That's cool. You must be like a natural. You must be naturally a very social person if it's relatively easy for you to kind of switch into different social dialects and play that social kind of game. I think for a lot of people that's very taxing. Like I could not imagine trying to do that for 6 different people. I can hardly do it for myself at like a cocktail party, let alone like 6 others.
yeah, I don't know. It's like I'm probably like the least extroverted extrovert. So I like analyzing people the most, but I don't want to like have the active engagement. I just want to sit back and do the analysis. I think it's like sorting. Like I'm also a very visual person and like editing photos, like sorting. Like I don't know if you use Arena. Arena is great, like Pinterest and a file system combined with like really cool content, and like
What's it called?
all of Arena, ARE.NA.
Oh yeah, I've seen it, but I never really had that like aha moment of why it would be worth doing. So make the case if you would.
I mean, Pinterest and a file system. If that isn't compelling to you already, I'll go on.
Meaning there's a local version also on your machine, or what do you mean by file system?
No. It's just more, I mean, it's like about organizing like your research and or like content you want to access in a way that's more like, I think this is like yet another like project Xanadu, right? Like the whole hyperlink, like how do we get our thought on the internet in a way that is like more natural to the way it actually occurs type thing. I think it's like the better version of Rome. I hate Rome. The user experience is so, it irks me. Like I'm
also befuddled by this like Rome fashion that everyone's talking about Rome. I played around with it. I played around with it once or twice, and I was just like, it's too. I don't want to turn all of my thoughts into complicated webs. I'm trying to solve the problem of having complicated webs. It's like my thoughts are already complicated webs. I want something that's going to cut through that. I don't want to like make hyperlinks between everything I fucking think. That's the problem.
Yes. And that's what I like about Arena. It's like you were definitely buying into that a little bit, which sometimes I'm like, I don't need this anymore. But it's like it is the minimum viable product, and so you're actually having to like think through those connections rather than just like, oh, these things are linked, and like that just makes everything more chaotic.
I see.
Works for my brain. But.
So you think Arena is your favorite kind of personal curatorial public tool?
I mean, to be fair, a lot of things in my brain work in systems. So I have systems around like my Pocket is integrated to like my bookmarks, and like every type of content I engage with has a slightly different formatting system. But
yeah,
like
me too.
Arena is like a main channel. Really? What's your system that you are most satisfied with?
I think the system that I've worked out that is kind of most robust and effective and efficient is the system I've built around reading online content, specifically for generating snippets that go to my Friday newsletter that I send out every week. So I have a really dope little system that just works really well, and I think it's pretty impressively efficient. I'm committed to doing a weekly newsletter every Friday, which I've been doing for something around like 15 weeks now. I haven't missed a week, and I pretty much just, it's a standard type of newsletter in that it's pretty much just like the best stuff I read that week, and that reflects kind of like the themes that I'm known for talking about and writing about. And mostly independent intellectuals on the internet. That's kind of the main gist of it. But and what I do for that, the system I built for producing that is it's mostly leverages Feedly. I don't know if you know of or use Feedly.
I haven't used it, but I know it.
Yeah, it's an RSS reader, and it's pretty nice. I think it's, of all the ones I've played with, it's my favorite RSS reader. So I have a ton of RSS feeds, but also there's a nice little Chrome extension that allows you to just basically store away anything, kind of like Pocket or Instapaper. So basically any bit of internet content that I read whatsoever, I've trained myself I channel it through Feedly. So everything goes to Feedly. It's a kind of catch-all ubiquitous capture layer that I use for Feedly. Now, what's good about Feedly is Feedly has nice integrations with Zapier, this automation platform. Yeah. And so what I do is anytime I read something in Feedly, if I highlight something, if I use their highlighter function, that snippet gets routed through Zapier, and it gets placed in a text file in my Dropbox. And but not just that. What's sweet about Zapier is you can format it on the way. So basically, I have custom colors and HTML formatting wrapped around the highlights when they get dropped into my Dropbox folder. So basically, come Friday, when I'm ready to send out the newsletter, it's pretty much all already drafted through the Zapier automations. And all I have to do is copy and paste from that file, and then paste it into into ConvertKit, where I send out my newsletters. So I have like a pretty jazzy, nicely styled, kind of curated newsletter, pretty much done all automatically through Zapier and Feedly. So I think that I'm pretty pleased with that. I have a bunch of other little systems, but that's the one that comes to mind that I think I'm most pleased with.
Are you, slightly off topic, but I've been talking to a lot of people about this recently, do you ever get worried as like a thought influencer of some type that you will be canceled on some platform and feel the need to like think of a way to centralize your audience? Like, is a newsletter in some way an effort to like do that, or not at all?
Yeah, it is definitely. I mean, I think everyone today who's interested in thinking creatively and freely over a long period of time, like if that's a long-term value or mission for you to think and to build a body of work that's creative and intelligent, I think you need to diversify your platforms for sure. And I think like you should put most of your energy into the email list just because
Mm.
it's the most disintermediated. You know, there's less political risk when it comes to email than any other platform.
Sure.
So yeah, I generally subscribe to the strategy of, I'm active on many platforms and I put out stuff on many platforms. But if I have any say over it, I'd rather send people to my email and build that up over time. That's like my main priority, frankly.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I was talking to somebody who's like a TikTok influencer about like their fear that TikTok's going to get shut down in the US, and there's like a massive part of their audience. But
Yeah, I think people should be totally worried about that. I mean, especially if you're into anything that's like at all provocative politically.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
for sure.
so yeah, email's where it's at, frankly, I think. Now, yeah, I mean, we could totally nerd out about this kind of stuff. You have any other systems you want to share that you're particularly interested in, or
I don't think none that are astounding at the moment.
right on?
I never realized them until somebody else asks about them, and then I'm like, oh yeah, like I have a subconscious system that's sort of like it's less about the technical effectiveness most of the time and more about like how to operationalize processes.
Right on. Right on.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so let's talk a little bit about this game of researching and evaluating seed stage startups. So for people who don't know what that is, it's basically just really early stage. And what do you've only been doing this for a little while. So, but I'm just kind of
Yeah.
curious as a relative neophyte, what's your kind of first impression of this world?
It's interesting. I mean, like, I don't know. I did not see myself as going into VC. Um, I don't know. I've always found like making predictions about patterns like super interesting and something that I can't really prevent myself from doing. And so in that sense, it's kind of a dream job. Like half of my job is to learn and like read white papers, read research, talk to like really smart people that I've looked up to for a long time and just email them and say, hey, like I want to talk to you about your ideas and your writing and your thoughts. And they respond most of the time, which is even cooler.
And how old are you again?
22.
22. Right on.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I'm definitely aided by the process that for a long time when I like didn't really have like I left my family, didn't really have a permanent place to live, was like working one job and trying to figure out like what the heck my next career step was when I wasn't in college or anything, and like thinking about like how to establish my own credibility and all that type of stuff
Right.
you have to think about. I basically would just go to any sort of educational event I could either like sneak into or was like free to the public that I found remotely interesting. And so I think in some weird way for a long time I've been preparing to do this because that was my main form of education, was just throw myself into some environment that I knew nothing about, ideally like way above my head, try and grok something they're talking about desperately or like a few of the main concepts, and then ask some question that would like sort of develop some respect to the point where they would like engage thoughtfully and we could go from there. And so I think in that sense it's been a very good sort of like it's a good way to like test your prediction making in general and sort of like build up that ability, but also like yeah, just get better at like seeing patterns in like deep tech spaces and that type of thing.
Yeah, right on. So I know that a lot of people in my audience, some people are, I have a pretty diverse audience, but some people in my audience are on the younger side, and a lot of them are in their own way just totally dissatisfied or alienated from the educational system also. And they're very interested in, alternatives and also kind of idiosyncratic paths to successful careers outside of the normal paths. And
For
so
sure.
I think you're likely to be quite interesting to at least a subset of my audience in this regard. So I'm
Yeah.
curious from your perspective and from your experience, kind of navigating a somewhat bumpy and idiosyncratic educational path. How did you land what a lot of people would see as a very good job at such a young age? Do you have any kind of insights for other people, perhaps your age or younger, who are kind of trying to finagle a similar outcome in their early career?
Yeah. I mean, so like the disclaimer that I'll make is for a long time, I don't know, for a long time I was trying to learn a lot from other people's specifically weird paths. And I had like a good friend basically be like, too many people want to give advice based off the one experience they've had, and
Right.
so much of life advice is just non-repeatable. And so I think that's very much probably true for me in some senses, but I think there are some principles that, you know, can
Right on.
be applied. I guess, like, let's see. It also depends. Like, think about what your goal is, right? Like, why are you going to college? What do you want to get out of it? Like, how can you jump around the typical, like, if you already hate the sort of like credentialing system that you currently have to operate through to get a lot of jobs, like, think about ways you can prove that what the credential is proving externally on your own time. And that's a good thing to think about anyways, because college degrees, I think, mean less and less in a lot of contexts. Like, you almost always have to have some connection to a place you're applying. Like, nobody applies via those random, like, turn your resume and say, it's like, nobody looks at those resumes either. So it's a good exercise in general. But yeah, like, get good at teaching yourself. I think, like, people should be good at this anyway. Like, there is all of MIT open courseware, you can access like the syllabi, the readings, like everything about a class online for free. And like, you need to get good at teaching yourself that type of stuff, and also find a space that works for you to sort of like like the iteration of ideas is like one of the most important things to, I think, developing intelligence. Like, you can be brilliant in isolation, nobody cares. You need like people who think differently than you, but like also are making a practice out of it to be in community with you, whether that's online, whether that's in person, in a way such that you can get their feedback sort of iteratively and very quickly, and develop sort of like a cycle of thinking. And like, that's true for writing, but it's also true for like informal thought. Like, I think Twitter is great for this.
Yeah. So in other words, what you're kind of suggesting is that Twitter is not just this kind of frivolous place where you just kind of like type in words and it goes into the void, but it is actually real exercises in both intellectual work and also kind of relationship building, but also in that kind of social membrane aspect of it, where thinking is in many ways kind of social and collaborative, and really kind of, you're kind of saying putting yourself into that and really investing in that is a worthwhile kind of aspect of building up to your kind of first job in a career that you want. Is that what you're driving at?
Yeah, for sure. And like, it doesn't have to be Twitter. And I think, I don't know, people who, I'm obviously biased, but I think I like talking to people who hate college a lot. And often people who hate college there's something that you hate about it that points to your taste for learning. And so if you have an instinct of like, I hate the way people write online often, like, I hate the way people write about their tech predictions, I hate the way people tweet about their tech predictions, you think it's so boring and not interesting. And so like, if you want to put your thought out there in a different way, like, think about why you hate the type of thought you see in academia, the type of thought you see from like tech Twitter people or whoever, and like, think about that consciously and like do the thing that you want to see in the world. So cheesy. But like, I don't know, like, there is not a diversity of like people putting out their thought in like different ways, like truly different ways. And everybody's like, oh, like, even on Twitter, right? Like, people are like, what type of account are you? Like, are you a tech person? Are you a philosophy person? Are you this? Are you that? Like, it doesn't
Are you an
matter.
e-girl?
Yeah, right. Are you an e-girl because you're online and you have a Twitter account? Like, I don't know. It's just like, if you have the good taste to hate college, uh, and you have like interests that you can't help yourself from learning about anyways, like, just put that out online. And I think inevitably, if you ask questions, and Twitter is better than anything else to like engage with the people that you think are smart, eventually you will develop like a community of people around you who are interested in like what feels like what nobody else might be interested in. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely buy that. And I've seen that happen time and time again. I think there's a certain person out there though, who's kind of thinking like they don't really know anyone, and they feel like if they just started tweeting a lot or putting stuff out there, that no one would really notice, or it wouldn't really work to grow their network. So I'm kind of curious, like, maybe in your personal experience, like how did this stuff play out for you? How did being active on Twitter actually, maybe you could give us some examples or something like that of how did this stuff kind of materialize into opportunities for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like one caveat for in response to what you're saying is like, don't just like, also, nobody like the person who is like, I have a Substack, like read my whatever, just because like if you don't give people context or reason to read your thoughts, like obviously you need that as well. Like you have to thoughtfully engage with other human beings. Like it's about like a full relationship with people. That's why like Twitter is better than LinkedIn for job searching, because you can actually like engage with people as humans and the robustness that they are. And so like nobody is going to follow your Twitter account if you're just like, here's my tech predictions, like give me a job or whatever. Like, I don't know. I think it definitely helped that originally when I was at Liberty, I was like lonely, bored, upset at like whatever the heck like political stuff was going on. And so I developed like a lot of relationships actually with people that I thought were smart, a lot of like anonymous accounts, especially. It was weird, like in the
And when you say relationships, you mean this is taking place through replies and DMs and what?
Yeah. Like DMs, I mean, I don't know. Like over the years, I've had so many crazy, like random Twitter things. Like first I got a ticket to this girl, Leslie, what is her last name? Like Carhart or something. It's a big InfoSec Twitter account with like 100 followers. She didn't follow me or anything, but it was just like, if anybody wants tickets to this hacker conference, like DM me and make your case for like why you want to learn about it. You have to be an outsider to the thing. So I DM'd her. She gave me the ticket for free, paid for me to go up to New York and like go to this conference. And so while I was there, I was like, I'm gonna meet all like my Twitter friends that are in New York. And I think I just like tweeted like, hey, if you're in New York, like let's hang out, and then DM'd people I knew were in New York. And I met like the very first person I met was somebody who's anonymous. And I had I talked to them before, I DM'd them, but I thought they were super young. They weren't like making efforts not to give any more information about them. But basically it was like, we had an amazing conversation. Like Twitter is so good at finding people who are like similar to you in ways you wouldn't think, but started doing that a lot. I like tweeted, I think about a year ago, like there's some quantum computing event at the Italian embassy, and was like, hey, anybody on Twitter, if you're going to be in DC, like come to this with me. It'll be fun. We can like chat and hang out. And Emma Salinas, who's like now good friends of mine, was like, hey, like I'll drive up from North Carolina. Can I stay at your house? And I was like, sure. I've never met you before, but that's fine. And we had a great time. We like hung out till late in the night and like hung out with some of my other friends, and like I love her to death now. And so like that's cool too. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. I've done similar things. I've met up with a lot of people from Twitter, and especially now in the pandemic mode, I feel like most of my friends are actually people on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like people I actually talk with on Zoom and stuff like that. I feel like it's kind of interesting how that's worked, but okay. Interesting. So yeah, the basic lesson I'm hearing from you is that you have to not just like type things into social media and click send, but or click tweet, but you have to actually like really go out of your way to be involved and reply to people and DM people. And if you're going to be somewhere, mention that you're going to be there and invite people to things. Like really kind of you have to go out of your way to be an active citizen, really.
Yeah. And when you're young, like your value is like time. Most of the greatest thing you have to offer is often time. And so it's like, if somebody needs something, like maybe offer to like read over their draft of stuff, like engage and show people that you care about their work, and often that they will like reciprocate eventually, not in like a calculating way, but just like be thoughtful. Like don't just ask people you admire for their time for no reason. They get a billion messages doing that already. Like nobody wants to see that.
Yeah, that's actually a good little tip to offer. Just offer to do something, like obviously not too onerous on you, but just offer to do something that you can give a little bit of time to. Even if people don't take you up on it, people will kind of remember you positively for it. Like I've been lucky enough to receive some offers. Like people will randomly DM me and say, hey, I'm willing, I if you need a proofreader or if you need this, happy to have it. But realistically, I never really like get around to the DM will get like swallowed in a day or two, and I'll never get around to it. But I will occasionally, like, I'll see them and I'll just be like, oh, they're cool. I'll kind of remember their face or their avatar or whatever. And I might even like follow them back or whatever, just because they're cool. And that's nice to have, and I probably won't even use your labor, but like, thank you. And I'm happy to consider you an associate,
Yeah. I literally used to do that. I'd be like, if you ever need anybody to edit anything, like anybody can edit, like anybody can do it. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, okay. Interesting. Cool. So maybe we could talk a little bit, I don't want to keep you too long, but we could talk a little bit about, let's talk about VC a little bit and the whole world. Since, I mean, I know I have some buddies who are founders, and some buddies I've met some like legit investors over the years, but I'm nowhere near that world personally or sociologically. Really, I'm not embedded in it myself. So as a young person, you probably have relatively, fresh eyes for this kind of thing. Like what's your take on VC as a whole? Like what's maybe are there particular kind of fashions or particular types of craziness at the moment that you want to flag for us? What's going on in VC world?
Yeah, I mean, people are chaotic on Twitter, first of all. Everybody knows that. On Clubhouse also. Like people love to gossip about people, especially when they perceive that they like have power and the freedom to do so.
What do you think what do most VCs get wrong from your youthful 22-year-old perspective? Like looking at these like big wealthy men, like what do you think is the main thing they don't understand?
I mean, I think understanding like the vibe of a person is huge. I don't know.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
I don't know. Like, just you can tell a lot about. I don't know. Like,
vibe check, bro.
Yeah, exactly. Like I tweet vaguely.
Well, a lot of them are kind of like autistic and right, like they're kind of like hyper focused, and that's not very hyper focused, very autistic. Sometimes it can mean they're not able to check the vibe. Sometimes, is that fair to say?
I don't know. Like I have autistic friends who are maybe even better at vibe checking than anybody. But I think the biggest thing, the like actual biggest thing that I see is that just people know a little bit about one thing and expand that to thinking they know a lot of things about all the adjacent areas. And it's like the part why I like working with the people that I work with is that I think they recognize that the part that's cool about being a VC is you get to sort of like, we're thesis focused, which means we like write out our theses on areas we want to invest in. The goal being that we have like some common body of thought, and then we bring that to the people who are way smarter than us and say, tell us where we're wrong and like argue with us.
Okay.
And I think a lot of VCs miss the like argue with us and tell us where we're wrong, because certainly like a lot more as somebody who's spent like a lifetime like working in this industry than us. And like that's the most valuable part of the job in many ways, I think, is like having people want to have that conversation with you all the time across many domains. Yeah, I don't know. People just love to pretend they know about everything all the time.
Right on. Do you by any chance know this guy, Eric Torenberg, I think his name is? Do you know this?
I don't. I mean, I've seen him on Twitter. I like don't know him personally or anything, but
because he DM'd me right after I said that you were coming on the podcast. He DM'd me. And I think he was inviting me on his podcast. I think I'm going to do his podcast. But anyway, it came. Well, I only mentioned it because it came right after I tweeted about you. So I was guessing he knew you or something. But
I think we've had like vague, like proximal sort of like interactions, but not well.
Right on. I was just curious. Cool.
Yeah.
I wonder how many other people we know. I wonder how many mutual friends we have other than default friend. Probably a bunch. I mean, you said that you're kind of in the post-rationalist sphere. Is that how you would describe it?
I don't even know. Like, I think that like nobody actually thinks they're post-rationalist or whatever, but I don't know. That just was like a community that started sort of like my Twitter connection. Yeah. You seem to be adjacent to some of the Urbit people. I mean, you interviewed Curtis. Yeah.
I'm adjacent to Urbit people. Yeah. Are you on Urbit?
I have a planet. I haven't like even fully, or I partially set it up. And I haven't since then because life is crazy.
Are you bullish on Urbit?
I think it's super cool. I mean, like the thing I'm obsessed with talking about is that like it's very trendy to be in tech and say that you're building like something that's apolitical and just like the ideals of the good thing. And I think Urbit is bold enough, for better or for worse, to say that's never been true, and like we're actually going to explicitly voice the ideals we think tech should take on, and if that overlaps with politics and religion, like so be it. That's sort of inevitable in human nature, and like we're going to tell it how it is, and if you like it, then come join us. And I think that is like a very powerful vision and sort of pivot in general. I also think a lot of genuinely very smart people work there, so
yeah, right on.
Always a plus.
It's kind of interesting thinking about you and I meeting today because, as I said, it was pretty random. Like, I don't know that much about you. I pretty much I take recommendations though pretty seriously. So if someone I know says like, "Oh, talk to her," I'll just do it on trust that it'll be cool. But it's interesting because I didn't even know that you're a Christian, and I'm a Christian too. Actually, I don't know if you even knew that, but
I didn't know that.
it's kind of cool because this, like, I don't know, we're in this kind of moment where I think secularism is kind of has a decreasing stock price, at least to a lot of people's eyes. I think it's increasingly clear to many people that you really can't run a very good or happy or functional society on like truly full secularism. I think anyway. I think that's kind of becoming clear to a lot of people, and there's all this kind of renewed interest in different types of traditional values and traditional value systems, and it's just interesting because for so long, you know, Christianity or religiosity in general was kind of seen as low education, kind of ignorant, anti-rational. But now it seems like there's this new wave, if you will, of people that are increasingly interested in Christianity and perhaps even willing to call themselves Christian, as I am, and it sounds like as you are, but who are super rational people, super, you know, as teched up in science and rationality as anyone, and as, you know, involved and invested in, you know, science and rationality as anyone is, but is not, but we're nonetheless, you know, increasingly interested in Christianity. So that's really interesting, because I didn't even know that about you, but I guess it's not for nothing, you know, it's not a coincidence, right? Because this is how social networks work, right? So I'd love to, you know, talk to you a little bit more about that. Are you connected to many other like super rational based Christians online?
I mean, yeah, I actually just went on. So do you follow Henry Zhu by any chance?
No.
So he runs this cool podcast called Faith in Source, which is about like, I mean, the first episode was him talking about how like maintaining open source communities like overlaps with a lot of like good practice for like the way we see communities as Christians and like faith more broadly. He's a Christian, and so we talked about a lot of this stuff. And also just, I hate the meme of like, can we unbundle the church, and like tech people being like, okay, like, look, like rationality and logic just does not cover all the bases. Like, what do? We have to like reinvent church. Like, is it core power yoga combined with this? Like, how can we reverse engineer it without like God or, you know, any actual core beliefs that like motivate us as a community to be adhered to one another?
Right.
And so I've definitely found more and more Christians. I didn't talk about it for a long time that I was a Christian because I wrote my senior thesis that I mentioned earlier on basically the realm of faith and science and how they overlap, because I mean, I thought the question was interesting in general, but my dad is like an aerospace engineer and was raised in like a very Catholic household and sort of like lost his faith. And both my parents were very like politically Christian, but like I wouldn't say like practicing at all. But the school I went to was very compelling to me, and like my faith definitely grew there. And so my dad had a lot of thoughts on like, science says we don't have souls, like the chemicals are telling us how to act, like all that type of stuff. And so I just like wanted to write about it, and I think it's, I don't know, definitely a God thing that it's been so applicable in real life after the fact since like, I don't know, 2016 or whatever. And I started tweeting about it recently because for a long time I was like, I don't want to be that person who's like arguing with people online. Like, I took apologetics high school classes in high school and all that type of shit, and like I didn't want to be that person, and I knew other people didn't want me to be that person, so I was like, it's fine. Somebody do you follow VGR?
Venkatesh Rao. Yeah, I follow him. I can't say I know him well. I don't know if he knows who I am, but I like him a lot. I think he's really cool.
Yeah, that's totally fair. He's doing this thing called Threadpalooza and giving people prompts they should write threads about. And so he did religion for me. And so I basically made this like, I don't know, 50 tweet thread being like, here's what I believe about religion. Because I think a lot of people have heard like, oh, she went to Liberty University, but like, she's not, like, she believes in science and like, you know, how can those two go together? And so people are very curious, I guess, and have had a lot of good conversations.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm super interested. I'm super interested in this little subculture because I think it is increasingly clear to people that just naive generic secularism, I think that's actually that has a decreasing status. I think it's increasingly clear to people that that's actually kind of dumb, and I think that's going to increasingly be seen. Like, if you're just a basic bitch atheist, that's going to be seen as like low status in the coming future. And right now, I think Christianity is still very low status in the professions, in tech, and I'm in VC, presumably in academia for sure. I mean, you'd agree with that, right? Like, it's definitely still
I have
low.
no clue what the like religious landscape of VC is actually like.
Well, you don't experience it like as a Christian. You in these worlds, you don't kind of feel like you don't kind of intrinsically know like those parts of your worldview are kind of looked down on.
I don't know. Like, I definitely see it like in the tech world for sure. Like, you see it, but 30-minute Zoom calls at a distance when you're meeting other VCs, definitely hard to like suss out what their religious beliefs are. But
sure. Yeah, no, anyway, all I was really getting at was I think like basic bitch secularism is going to be decreasing in status. And I do think there does seem to be some early possible signs that Christianity is actually increasing in educated circles, I think, because of just the utter failure of secularism as a kind of basis for a functional life and a functional community. So yeah, I'm always very interested when I meet like other really smart, kind of educated, and it's hard to summarize it. But when I meet people who are Christian and they're also like movers and shakers in like higher status fields, it's always really interesting to me. And I feel like there's more and more of that, but that's just an impression.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was talking to my boyfriend. His like, there's an interesting study that I think he was promoting for work, where it was talking about like the loss of faith in millennials broadly, like as a trend, and what they attributed that to. And basically, the thesis of this research was that like the generation, like their parents, and I think it applied to Gen Z too. I don't remember for sure, but their parents, the faith they saw was often like cultural and even more specifically political, so often that like the representation kids saw of Christianity was like, we vote this way or we talk about people this way because of our religious beliefs, and other than that, like, not as important. Like, everything fell secondary to its political involvement. And I think that is like a very interesting lens to view the sort of like reaction to religion that I think everybody saw in like the 2000s, the early 2000s, sort of like hit its peak. Scott Alexander also has a really good piece about this. I forget what it's called, but
yeah, interesting for sure. So, all right, we're coming up on an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but maybe I could ask you a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm kind of just curious about is, since you're young and you're a woman and probably in the world of VC, you probably have something of a minority status in both of those dimensions. I don't know what your particular situation is like, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what, as a young woman in these tech circles, what you might be able to see that other people can't see, So I'm kind of just curious, like, now that you're doing research for, seed stage investing, are there like is there a particular niche or a particular kind of concept that you're dying to see, you're dying to invest in, that's not getting enough attention, or vice versa? Is there way too much attention in a certain area that you think is just like totally over?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I did not realize until I entered VC actually like how crazy the diversity thing is, even more so how crazy it is that like so many people went to like top 10 schools and then did like their MBA in business and have had like this like VC plan for their life, which is just very interesting.
Right.
But it is cool because the people that haven't done that, and even some of those people are really cool, not to overgeneralize, but a lot of people who haven't done that, it's always interesting to see like what their actual focus is, because really there's just like all sorts of people who
right. So what's yours?
What is my what?
What's your unique focus?
Okay, so machine learning, definitely. When I went through the Innova personalized healthcare accelerator, I was researching basically like, I was really obsessed with like federated learning, type of like on device learning. So if you have like Google, Apple keyboard, your specific personal data doesn't leave your phone, which like when we're talking about HIPAA regulations for healthcare, that's huge, right? Because like healthcare hasn't really been affected by like the machine learning boom as much because of so much of the personal data regulation stuff. And yeah, the way they do that is like you train a model on your device, and this sort of like high level takeaway is then sent to the cloud so that you're like, I don't know, your social security number, if you were to be texting that on your phone, like using your Google keyboard isn't the thing that gets sent to the cloud or whatever. So I'm super interested in companies that are doing that in general. It's like a difficult landscape for a lot of reasons, like partially because there's such a high, like the places that need this are not normally known for having like crazy cool ML teams. So you have to like educate the team and then also like make a beautiful project on top of everything else. So that's definitely something. I'm writing a thesis on game engines right now, which is like the software that underlies gaming. So like 3D rendering, servers, like physics engines, all that type of stuff. And currently have 30 pages. Bad decision to start out that way, working backwards and whittling that down. But I think I'll definitely like that. I will publish soon and like really be looking for companies in that space. Healthcare, I don't know. Yeah, I'm interested in like the people that basically will solve just like applying ML to like super sensitive data, specifically healthcare stuff. I was researching like basically using machine learning to understand miRNA concentration, which people have known for a long time. A high concentration can be very indicative of something like renal cell carcinoma. And so, but that's also like, there's a lot of other variables that can influence that. And so a doctor realistically doesn't have time to sit down and say like, hey, have you had a common cold in the past week? And like do all that type of stuff, but machine learning is great at that. So if you can solve the personal data issue of like a wearable tracker, then that gets very interesting. Yeah, so that is a main thing. I mean, what do I want to see more of in general? I don't know.
Let me guess. Electric scooters.
Oh yeah, micro mobility for sure.
Honestly, I'm a huge fan of the electric scooters in Albuquerque.
Really?
Yeah, the one that I have here is called Spin scooters. Frankly,
Okay.
I love those little guys. I take them all the time. They're closed down for the pandemic, but
Rip.
I like it. I gotta say.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, like Compound's like brand, I would say, is basically me having only been there for 2 months, but the team is like really, really good at finding people who actually have like a core technical bet, whatever that may be, that is like very like non-popular, difficult to communicate at investors at the next stages, because obviously that's a huge problem people don't think about a lot, is like even if you convince the first round of investors, those investors also have to make sure that the next round of investors can be convinced. And so I think we are always interested in companies where we feel confident in the technical aspect of it. Like Mike and I both feel very strongly that like reading a lot of research papers, reading white papers, that type of stuff is the best way to find interesting companies. Like knowing the landscape yourself. And so I'm always looking for a company that is making some core technical bet that is very interesting and sort of like risky, and you might have a communication problem in terms of like convincing the outside world, but like that is where our strength is. And so I see. There's not a lot of people who think about it exactly like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. So basically what you're saying is you focus on the technical feasibility and getting that rock solid. So
yeah, I mean, I think so, a lot of people would say technical feasibility in some sense, but like avatar-based social media, for example. So a lot of time when we have a thesis that doesn't get, like, nobody is telling us we're not convinced that we need to do any more refining on it after we've done a lot of that, and we keep looking for a company in that space, but we don't find it, we'll incubate a company, which basically means like create it internally. And so the second to last company we did that with before I was there, obviously, but I work with founders, it's basically like a talent agency for like digital influencers, not in the sense that like it's a digitized version of a real person, it's like not a real person. And so I don't know, I think avatar based media in general is really interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. Huh.
Yeah. So
right on. Yeah, maybe I'll make a bunch of avatars of myself. This kind of goes back to what you were saying before about having 6 Twitter accounts.
There you go. Yeah, I know. I just was preparing myself unknowingly for working at Compound.
What about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos? Is Elizabeth Holmes broke or woke?
Oh my gosh.
Was she, how do you see her? Was she a straight up grifter, scammer, or was she just a kind of ambitious genius who just came up a little short.
I mean, I think like most of the grifters, she was pretty like, genuinely convinced. I think that like, I mean, this is true for a lot of smart people. You sort of like to force your brain to make something exist, you overpromise, and then you like that is more motivational than anything. And I know so many people in DC who have worked for political campaigns that like look very similar, where the bosses are just insane, and it's like because they like believe in this like mythologized version of themselves. And like sometimes that works extremely well, but like only right up to a limit. And I think like a lot of brilliant people put themselves in that unfortunate position. And I don't think she's good. Like I'm not saying go do that, but I do think
I do. I like her. I defend her. I'm the only person to defend Elizabeth Holmes. I think she's
Anna
cool.
Delvey, Caroline Calloway, like all yeses for you.
Yeah, I think Caroline Calloway is also kind of impressive. I got to admit. Who's the other one though?
I do think she's interesting. Anna Delvey, she was like the New York socialite girl. I think she was like from somewhere. Oh, was she Russian? I don't know. She's from somewhere else and came to the US and basically convinced everybody that she's like super high status. She like beat out this other art person for this like hypothetical gallery she's gonna build that like very like all this interesting high society stuff. And she like didn't have any money. She was staying at this luxury hotel and basically just convincing everybody around her that like she was important and famous. And like,
oh, that's funny. I don't know of her case. I gotta look into her.
Yeah,
I mean, I think the reason I have a sympathy with these people is because I think in a lot of ways, they are a symbol for all the people around them as much as anything else. You know, it's like an Elizabeth Holmes, like to put it on one person to describe the Theranos situation and that whole saga, to kind of pin that down on one person as the cause of it and the representative of it is just not quite right. It's actually a truly networked social phenomenon that is actually being referred to when you use the name Elizabeth Holmes. You're actually referring to a little social cognitive epidemic catastrophe. Right? And I think we have this kind of very individualistic mental model where we always pin the blame on one person as the kind of a scapegoat in a way. But in fact, what's most interesting is that this person and their kind of charismatic gifts, or however you want to summarize, you know, what makes them unique in the story, is actually just a lightning rod for like a whole huge set of complex pathologies among the people around them. And so I don't know, it's my own like little subversive thing to actually champion these people. Like, you know, I will die. Elizabeth Holmes did nothing wrong. This is what I will say. Even though it's not true. What's that?
Did you follow It Is What It Is by any chance? Did that make it to like your corner of Twitter? The like
I don't think so.
mouth eye thing.
Tell me.
You might find it similarly interesting. I think it's like the Zoomer, like Gen Z version of this type of grift. I already forget that analogy, but basically, this group of like really young people adjacent to the tech industry. I think some of them are like musicians, like designers, whatever. Basically, we're all sort of like using that face, which people have described previous to this meme thing as "it is what it is." And basically, every person who added it in their bio, once one person did, started getting added to a group chat, and they got up to like 60 people. And they started just like doing funny stuff, like making mock-ups of like this app that would exist relative to this meme. And eventually they decided like, we're gonna like do a scammy and or like performance art piece where we basically pretend that there is an app and get everybody to freak out on Twitter over the wait list. The even more brilliant thing was that when you have 60 people, nobody believes you have like 60 people on this team for this like fake app, right? And so everybody's like, oh my gosh, everybody else is talking about it. People were saying like, sorry, like we already have VCs on the waiting list, like nobody can invest, like wait till the next round, blah, 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 just like building up hype in every single respect. And then they also started saying like, hey, if you donate to like all these different like Black Lives Matter organizations, like you'll move up on the waiting list, like just give us your money, like maybe that'll be relative to like the amount you move up on the waiting list. We really can't say.
Wow.
And like just kept like building it up more and more. And then there's like all sorts of interesting, like they just had people who had like every sort of specialty, you know, fan cams, like K-pop fan cams. Have you seen these before?
Do tell.
So it's this video that like K-pop people, it originated with K-pop. Like a lot of times if you go to like a viral hashtag on Twitter now, you'll see them where it's like people comment and be like, stan, like, I don't know, like stan like whatever K-pop group. And it's just like a video compilation, often with like very specific music and types of editing of the idol that they're obsessed with. Or like and they do that partially, I think, to sort of like engineer virality for just like notability. Like, we think you should like worship our leader as well, like here, in something totally unrelated. And sometimes it's specifically to like take over, like signal their mass power to like take over a hashtag. So if somebody is like being canceled and people think it's funny, the like K-pop stans will like use their fan cams to like take over like a trending like hashtag.
Ooh,
More and
wow,
more
powerful.
increasingly. I know it's very interesting. I like K-pop people in general, I think, understand the web like much better than any of us.
Yeah, that's
But so
cool.
yeah, it's super interesting. I also think Zoomers see everything as like algorithmic systems to be hacked in a way that like other generations do not. But they had people even making fan cams for the apps, and then VCs started like saying positive things, saying negative things. Somebody like started tweeting takes about the app and like the ethics of it, and they were like, I hate the privacy of the app, just like is unconscionable, whatever, blah blah blah. The app doesn't exist, clearly. They were like, this is ageist, whatever. And so they started making fan cams of the commentary about their app, and it turned out the app didn't exist at all, and it was like all a performance thing about like basically how easy it is to like scam people into falling into hype for anything. So
Right. Yeah. So fan cam, that is a term that refers specifically to that type of video that they make.
Yeah. I'll DM you some. It's like it's partially a stylistic thing and partially like a content thing, and it kind of in the way that like meme has become more and more amorphous. I think fan cam applies to more and more things. But
Okay. I'm gonna be the first person to make an Elizabeth Holmes fan cam.
Oh, for sure. That would be
I'm,
great. If
I'm
you
gonna
do
take
that,
over.
I would
I'm gonna
retweet
take
it.
over trending hashtags with like I'll change my username to Elizabeth Holmes Stan, and I'll just tweet over and over again.
Yes.
Elizabeth Holmes did nothing wrong.
Yes, you need to like, yeah, for sure. I'm excited for this movement.
All right. Well, we got a few questions that we didn't get to, but it's okay. No problem. We actually did. People asked some questions, like Michael asked how to break into VC at such a young age. We pretty much did address that. So in a few different ways. So there you go, Michael. And Jamie Sampson asks, you mentioned that you've met some high-level investors in the VC world. Were you generally impressed by these people, or did you ever experience a disappointing sort of Dorothy looks behind the curtain moment? So maybe if you're not too tired, we'll take this as our very last question, Nicole.
Sure.
I think Jamie's might be referring to something I said, but you can totally answer this also. Yeah, I would say generally, this is generally true. I think when you meet people that are famous or there's some sort of aura or mystique around them, in general, you learn that they're just humans, right? And they just have, they're just like any other normal person with strengths and weaknesses. And so, I mean, I don't have any particularly salacious stories or anything like that, but I've had the good fortune of meeting, like, I guess, a handful of quote unquote famous people. And my experience has always been that it's just, they're just normal people. And I don't know, I don't really get into celebrity stuff anyway. Like when I don't really put celebrities on a pedestal in my mind to begin with. So I never really had like a big, disappointment or disillusionment with meeting someone famous personally. I kind of expect them to be pretty normal, and they usually are pretty normal. So not a really interesting answer, I guess, but I don't know. Do you have an interesting answer to that, Nicole?
I think like I honestly have not met that many investors, like high level investors specifically, mostly because it's easy. I think Twitter makes it even more easy than to like assess people and their vibes ahead of time. And so you're like, maybe I don't want to meet that person. They're not that exciting. Like I've met a few people who have, I don't know, who like their main thing is an investor, and then like they happen to be an investor and just generally a cool person, and then most of the time it's not a big deal. I think I was definitely unimpressed with like SF as like a hub of things, which is like
really?
a whole nother topic. Yeah, I think people are just like, basically one of my very sweet younger friends flew me out to meet people there, and was like, I think this is important, like good for your career, and just generally you'll find it interesting. And I think like maybe intention would be like she found a job in SF by, I think, essentially like she got this grant that Tyler Cowen runs, and you can sort of like use it for a lot of things, and used it to find mentors partially. And she mostly did that by flying to SF, messaging all the people that she loved the most, like many of whom have a ton of like Twitter followers or like otherwise intellectual clout, and like putting them in a room together and saying, I'm gonna have a dinner, come or don't. And like basically all of them came, and it was a smashing success, and she got a job, I think, and ended up moving to SF like a few weeks later, and she's like 18 or something, or
Wow,
19
that's an
maybe.
interesting tactic.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And so I think she wanted to help me in a similar way, and I went to SF. And I think if I were 19 and did the same thing, I would have moved there. Like it's just another world. Like people are building things all the time, and it's just another world. Like if you felt isolated for having that mentality, like it's very understandable that this would be like a compelling place to you. But I think it's kind of crazy. There's like, in terms of like well-rounded living situation, there's no intergenerational wisdom for like maybe slightly understandable reasons, which is that if you're doing something genuinely crazy, probably like the more separated mentally in any sense those people are from you, whether that's age or like life experience, than hearing like every time you tell a person your idea and they have like strong criticisms for it, most people are going to feel very disencouraged by that. And so I think that sort of like naturally pushes like this sort of like intergenerational community away in San Francisco. Okay. And I think that was very sort of like disheartening to me. So I felt that way about like SF vibes as a whole. I mean, don't get me wrong, like the hackerspace and stuff, there's a lot of like brilliant, really interesting people, but disenchanted with SF as a city, which is my replacement answer.
Yeah. I mean, I only ever visited San Francisco for 1 week, and I did get to meet a handful of cool people, and I enjoyed meeting some cool people. But for me, I mean, I've never had ambitions in this world, really. Like I've never been interested in raising capital for any reason whatsoever. So take that. So that's a bit of a caveat here. I guess if you're interested in raising capital, you kind of will have a different attitude towards all this. But my personal take on the Bay Area, but I would also say the same thing about New York City and other kind of high status social hubs, is that personally, I'm just like allergic to social scenes in some way. Like I don't know if there's something unique about me or what it is. I could just be a little weird in some ways, but like I get kind of grossed out a little bit by any type of like geographically concentrated amount of like cool people. Like whenever there's like a scene and it's cool and there's, people who are, famous, or, there's, just like it basically replicates the like high school cafeteria vibe pretty much. Definitely. And as soon as I feel it, I kind of get a bit, I don't know, like grossed out, and I just want to run away from it as quickly as possible. Like I'm much more personally, I mean, so I'm not like preaching to other people. I'm not saying you should not, like, there's a good case to be made that if you're young and you're ambitious, there are many good reasons to go into where the action is. So I'm definitely not saying don't do that, but I am saying I do think there are risks to that a lot of people don't realize, which is a kind of generalized social conformity and a kind of, you start playing to a crowd based on what they think is cool and what is in and fashionable and normal to them. And I think there can be a lot of kind of perverse social conformity effects that personally I just try to steer clear of it. Like I'd much rather just be like I'd rather be a big fish in a small pond, honestly.
Yeah
I think
100%.
Like I went to where I did my PhD. It was a good university, but a middle tier university, not an Ivy League school. So we had like all of our professors were super legit, really well published, and most of them did their PhDs at Ivy League universities. But I went to Temple University, and so it was middle tier, but big, well funded, totally solid research university. And I liked it because a lot of the other students were not that ambitious. And that's fine. And that's just, some people are not that ambitious, but I was very ambitious. So it was like pretty easy for me to feel like I was pretty hot shit because I was just like more ambitious than other people. And there wasn't this like scene of like super powerful people. I think I'm the type of person that in a scene of super powerful people, I'm going to become kind of, I don't know, like reticent or risk averse or something like that. Whereas if I'm just like, I'd rather personally be like a young blogger in Nebraska or something like that in like a medium-sized town and just be like the most genius, like creative, badass, like blogger and podcaster in like Lincoln, Nebraska or something. Like to me, that's like a more fun and energizing type of vibe than trying to, make a name for yourself in some kind of like cool kid circle.
Definitely. Yeah. Like I think I will always have a pretty core group of friends who just like isn't on Twitter, doesn't understand Twitter. Every time I talk about Twitter, it's just like, shut up. And so like I think that's like a good life balance to have for sure. Like it's nice to have the friends that you can sort of like be obsessively whatever about. Like that was something I was missing for a long time for sure. But yeah, I understand. Like once you're, it's just I always like I do it once I get. I'm just gonna start asking everybody that I meet from Twitter. Do you feel the need to like constantly perform your persona from online in real life? Because I feel like so many people like want to project their like intellectual prowess like constantly, and like nobody wants to live like that. Like it's not fun.
Right. Yeah, I think I just think if you're a young person and you're trying to navigate these things, I think you just need to listen to what type of person you are. Like you need to pay close attention to your own internal vibes and your own internal signals. Like what types of situations make you feel the most powerful and creative and capable, and that what types of contexts actually are correlated with you doing the biggest, best, most interesting stuff that you can. And for some people, that's going to be being in the mix of somewhere like the Bay Area, but some people are going to be kind of oppressed by that also. Right. So that it's a very personal thing. Well, Nicole, it was a pleasure meeting you. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but were you going to say something else?
I was just going to say, if people are shitty and you think they're shitty and other people think they're smart, don't ignore that. Just like, don't like engage with those people or like follow them anymore. Like you almost always have the right instinct. Follow that instinct.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Definitely trust your gut on that. And even if you're wrong, it's still going to make you unique in a way, you know, like whenever you have opinions that are different than others, like even if they're just hunches, right? And it's not going to hurt anyone either way, if you trust them or not. It's always better to cultivate like the things that make you weird, like even if they're wrong in some way. As long as you're not like buying some hype that is a fundamentally false model of how the world works. You know, people, I think especially young people, should generally trust whatever they think or feel that is a little bit weird, because that's going to differentiate you, whatever you decide to do. That's my general 100%. Take. Anyway, Nicole, it's really nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you.
Twitter friends. We're now, I hope to some degree, real life friends. Maybe one day our paths will cross. Where are you again? You're in what region again?
Northern Virginia, and then I'm going to move to New York sometime before September 1st.
Cool. Well, yeah, my family's in New Jersey, so I'm in the New York area quite often. And it sounds like we have more mutual friends online than we even realize, I would bet. So especially in this post-pandemic world where I have the strong sense that IRL social networks are going to become increasingly correlated with online social networks in the way, just because, you know, our limited sense of what's real is increasingly merging with what the internet is. So I suspect there's a decent chance our paths will cross at some point.
Definitely. Cool. This is
cool.
Fun.
Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it. It's been fun.
Yeah. Do I just peace out from the Zoom?
You can just peace out from here. Yeah.
Okay. See ya.
All right. Bye, Nicole. Later. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. That was interesting. I like the random recommendations. I mean, I've been following her for some time. I've known who she is for a while, but having her on the podcast was a random suggestion from someone, whoever that was. Thank you for connecting us, and thank you for making the recommendation. That was interesting chat. You know, I like having spots on the podcast that are fairly random, where it's just like someone pops up on my radar and they're trying to do a podcast. Like, okay, yeah, just come on the podcast, because you never know. You know, you never really know who you're going to meet or what's going to come of it. You know, and actually this is something worth reflecting on, I think, because a lot of people, you know, if they start a podcast and it gets a little bit of success and they have a little bit of traction, a lot of people, their instinct is like, okay, now I got to grow this. Now I got to get famous people every time and more famous people. And then, you know, I'm going to dominate the world. And like, obviously there's some degree of that if you want to grow your podcast, and it's fun to grow things, right? So that's fine. But there is another element that I think people lose sight of, which is that randomness is a really valuable thing, and you need to introduce a steady stream of people that you don't really even know why exactly you're having them on the podcast. And I don't mean that with any disrespect at all. Like Nicole seemed like she was cool, interesting. She's very young. She seems, you know, quite creative and accomplished so far for such a young woman. And but I mean, random in that I didn't really know what we would talk about. I didn't really know, you know, what would come of it. But I like that. And podcasts are a good opportunities for that. It's a good platform to be able to introduce a steady stream of somewhat random kind of connections and conversations. And yeah, people that I do podcasts with, I will regularly meet them later at some point, and you just have that little, you have that nice little basis with someone when you do a podcast with them, and you never know what will come of that. So that was fun. Thanks to Nicole for coming out. I hope she enjoyed it. That's a weird thing about podcasting, is you never really know if people enjoy it. You're kind of like, man, maybe they regretted that. I'm always thinking that. I'm like honestly, I'm pretty like neurotic in some ways. And whenever I finish a podcast with anyone, I'm always kind of thinking like, man, did they hate that? Maybe they were just like bored the whole time, or annoyed. Maybe I said something bad. That is one of the bad things about podcasting. And then you don't get to do that kind of confirmation check, because it's so dematerialized and disembodied. So you never really find out. If it was IRL, you could you turn off the recording, and then you can powwow a little bit, hang out, maybe have a drink or something like that. But no, when you're doing it on the stream, you don't get that. You just cut off the conversation, and then you're left to wonder, did we really understand each other? But it is what it is, right? That's the internet. I'm a pro at this shit by now. This ain't my first rodeo, baby. All right, folks. Other Life Podcast. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe to the channel if you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube. I will be back on soon. I am moving out of Albuquerque soon. I'm going to Montana. I don't know where yet exactly, but we have found a rental and we have applied for it, and we think we're probably going to get it. So there's a very good chance I will be in Montana within 2 weeks, within 3 weeks max, let's say. So it's going to be weird. It's going to be interesting, but should be fun. So I'll keep you posted on my whereabouts. I'll be back on the podcast regularly, as always, every week. And yeah, thanks for coming out tonight. Big thanks to my patrons, as always. Shout out to the patrons. Very grateful. All right, folks. I'll see you next time.